Fear doesn't hide in shadows or darkness. Sometimes it's trapped in an old, dust-covered machine, like a radio that's been silent for years, but suddenly speaks with a voice that seems to come from beyond time. Welcome to Whisper Dark, where every story opens a door. And this is Rachel's story, a New York school teacher who was sorting through her grandfather, Sergeant Edward Lewis's, old papers when she found a battered military radio, rusted, broken. But when she pressed its button out of curiosity, a faint voice emerged after a few moments. Rachel, exactly like her mother had described Edward's voice. Rachel's hands trembled. She dropped the radio. It hit the ground, but the voice didn't stop. "Rachel, can you hear me?" The voice was now clear, deep, and heavy, as if someone was calling from far away. Rachel glanced at the room's door, which was closed, but she felt someone watching her. She picked up the radio and locked it in a closet, but all night, that voice echoed in her ears. When she woke in the morning, the closet's lock was open, and the radio was on the floor by her bed. She thought maybe she'd gotten up in her sleep, but her heart refused to believe it. Rachel contacted her friend Mark, a local historian. Mark told her that Operation Black Knight was a secret military project aimed at establishing contact between time and worlds. Edward was a key member of the project, but vanished during a mission in 1945. Mark referenced an old military report that mentioned a machine built to supposedly open a door, but there was no record of what lay beyond it. Rachel dug through her grandfather's diary, which read, "We tried, but we were wrong. They're not like us. They're waiting." Rachel gathered the courage to turn the radio on again. This time the voice said, "Rachel, the map, the cave." She pulled out a map from Edward's papers, marked with a circle and a star inside it. The map pointed to a forest a few hours from New York. Rachel decided to go to the forest with Mark. There they discovered a cave with the same circle and star carved on its entrance. When Rachel touched it, she felt a strange jolt, and that voice echoed in her ears. "You're close, but be careful." Inside the cave was an eerie silence. Mark scanned the walls with his flashlight, revealing strange symbols like some ancient language. Rachel turned on the radio, and the voice, now angry, said, "You have to shut it down, or they'll all come through." Rachel and Mark exchanged glances. Who were they? And where was Edward? Deep in the cave, they saw a metallic structure, part of a machine, with the same symbol as the map. When Rachel touched it, a strange cold gripped her, and a blurry vision appeared. Edward, in a dark place, screaming, "Rachel, close the door!" Deep in the cave, that metallic structure stood before Rachel and Mark, its carved symbols glowing as if alive. Rachel gripped the radio tightly and turned it on again. This time the voice was soft, but clear. "Rachel, shut down the machine. They're waking up." Mark aimed his flashlight at the structure, revealing a panel with buttons and a large lever. Rachel recalled a page in the diary. "The machine bends time, but its price is blood," Mark said. "This could be the machine from Operation Black Knight." He tried to touch the lever, but before he could, a loud rumble echoed in the cave, like metal crashing. Rachel looked back to see the cave's entrance sealed shut. They were trapped in that dark place. The radio spoke on its own. "You've opened the door." Rachel's heartbeat quickened. She saw a red light flashing on the machine's panel. Mark tried to read the symbols on the walls, saying they might be part of an ancient ritual the military used for their experiment. Rachel found another clue in the diary. "Where they come from, there's no time. They slip into our dreams." Suddenly, a strange sound came from the machine, like a hum echoing from thousands of miles away. Rachel noticed a strange light glowing on her hands, emanating from the machine. Mark pushed the lever, but instead of stopping, the machine grew louder. The cave walls shook, and Rachel felt herself lifting off the ground. She heard Edward's voice. "Rachel, you have to go back now." Before she could process it, a blinding light engulfed her. When her eyes opened, she wasn't in the cave. She stood in a strange gray landscape where the sky was red and odd shapes moved on the ground. The radio was in her hand, and Edward's voice was closer. "You shouldn't be here. They've seen you now." Rachel stood in that strange world, where the air carried a metallic burning smell. The ground beneath her feet was soft but cold, and in the distance, odd shapes moved, like shadows without bodies. The radio crackled with Edward's voice. "Rachel, run! They're behind you!" She turned to see strange entities approaching, their eyes glowing like red lights. She started running, but her movements felt slow, like running through water. The radio spoke. "The map! Use it!" Rachel pulled the old map from her pocket, the one with the circle and star. New symbols were appearing on it, as if it were rewriting itself. She touched one symbol, and a glowing circle appeared before her, like a portal. She jumped through it. When she came to, she was back in the cave, but Mark was gone. The radio spoke with Edward's voice. You opened the door. Now they know where you are. Rachel saw new symbols on the cave walls that weren't there before. She opened the diary, where a new page had appeared, as if someone were writing it now. Their world isn't for us. They feed on our fear. Rachel decided to destroy the machine. She grabbed a heavy rock and struck it, but instead of breaking, the machine emitted a light that pushed her back. She saw the same symbols from the cave walls now etching onto her hands. Edward's voice was fading. Rachel, you're part of them now. You can't escape. The symbols on Rachel's hands burned, as if being seared into her skin. She tried to leave the cave, but every door led her back to the metallic structure. The radio played on its own, and Edward's voice was now menacing. You called them. Now you're theirs. Rachel told herself it was a dream, but the pain in her hands felt real. She found another page in the diary. The only way to stop the machine is blood. Rachel thought she might need to offer her blood. She picked up a sharp rock and made a small cut on her palm. When her blood dripped onto the machine, it emitted a strange sound, and the cave walls glowed. But instead of shutting down, a new portal opened, and a strange entity emerged, resembling Edward, but with hollow eyes. Rachel, it said, you freed us. Rachel tried to step back, but her legs felt glued to the ground. The entity touched her hands, and she felt her body grow cold. She threw the radio to the ground, but it returned to her hand. Edward's voice merged with the entity's. You're part of our world now. Rachel gathered all her courage and pressed a button on the machine's panel. A loud explosion followed, and she was back in the gray world, but not alone. Mark's voice echoed behind her. Rachel, what have you done? He was injured, and the same symbols were on his hands. In the gray world, Rachel and Mark stood facing each other, the symbols on their hands glowing. Mark's face was pale with fear. He said, this place, it's not for us. We have to go back. But Rachel felt there was no way back. The radio kept repeating Edward's voice. Blood. Blood will close the door. Rachel looked at the map again, where a new path had appeared leading to a strange structure. They moved toward it, but with each step, the air grew heavier. Strange sounds came from the distance, like thousands screaming together. Rachel saw blood dripping from Mark's hand, and where it fell, odd shapes formed on the ground. When they reached the structure, they saw a massive machine, far larger than the one in the cave. At its center was a glowing circle, like a door. Rachel opened the diary, which read, to close the door, a life is needed. Mark looked at her with terrified eyes. Does one of us have to die? He asked. Rachel shook her head. We'll find another way. But before she could act, a light from the machine pulled Mark toward it. He screamed as his body began to fade. Rachel tried to grab him, but her hands grasped nothing. The radio spoke. You're alone now, but they're still hungry. Rachel stood alone in the gray world. Mark was gone. The symbols on her hands glowed brighter, and she felt them controlling her body. Edward's voice was faint. Rachel, you're part of them, but you can fight. She looked at the machine, its glowing circle still open. She decided to close it, even if it cost her life. She saw a final page in the diary. To close the door, you need a heart, not blood. Rachel thought it might mean a symbolic sacrifice. She pushed past her fear and placed her hand on the machine's panel. A strange force gripped her, and Edward's shadow appeared. Rachel, you're my last hope, he said. Edward explained that Operation Black Knight had opened a dimension where time and space followed different rules. The entities there fed on human fear and emotions. Edward was trapped in that dimension, and now Rachel was on the same path. He said, to shut the machine, you must let go of fear. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to release every fear from her heart. When she touched the machine again, a blinding light erupted, and she was back in the cave. The machine was silent, and no voice came from the radio. But as she left the cave, she noticed the symbols on her hands were still there. When Rachel emerged from the cave, the forest was eerily quiet. She looked at her hands. The symbols were fading, but still present. She returned home, but something felt different. Her room looked the same, yet a strange haze lingered over everything. The radio was on her bed, though she'd left it in the cave. That night, she dreamed of Edward leading her through a strange city where buildings floated in the air. He said, Rachel, the door never fully closes. They're still behind you. When she woke, the radio turned on by itself. You'll come back. She tried to smash it, but it kept reforming. She searched for Mark, contacted the police, but they found no trace. She reopened Edward's diary, where a new sentence appeared. They come in your dreams because that's where they can control you. Rachel decided to control her dreams. She contacted a local spiritual expert who told her the symbols were part of an ancient curse, tying her to that dimension. Rachel performed a ritual, drawing symbols with her blood. But as she completed it, her room's walls shook and a voice echoed, "You can't escape us." Rachel now dreamed every night of returning to the gray world. In each dream, Edward warned her, but his voice grew fainter. One night, she saw herself in a strange temple, surrounded by entities. They said, "You are our door." Rachel screamed and woke, but her room wasn't her room anymore. The walls bore the same symbols as the cave. She contacted the spiritual expert again, who said the entities gained power from her fear, and she needed to control her mind. Rachel began meditating, but every time she closed her eyes, she was pulled toward the gray world. One night, in a dream, she saw Edward standing before a strange structure. He said, "Rachel, you must come here willingly." She decided to return to that world. She saw a new symbol on the map, pointing to another cave. She went there and found another machine. When she touched it, she was back in the gray world. Mark was there, but his eyes were empty. He said, "Rachel, we're one now." Rachel stood before Mark in the gray world. He wasn't the Mark she knew. His voice was like the entities. She gripped the radio tightly and heard Edward's voice. "Rachel, this is your last chance." She looked at the machine, glowing brightly. She opened the diary, which read, "To close the door, you must sacrifice yourself." Rachel decided to shut it. She let go of her fear and stepped into the machine's circle. She felt her body lighten. She saw Edward standing before her. He said, "Rachel, you've freed us." But before she could understand, the circle closed, and she was back in her room. The radio was silent, and the symbols on her hands were gone. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw a strange glint in her eyes. She opened the diary, where a final sentence read, "The door is closed, but they're still inside you." Rachel returned to her normal life, but she felt something had changed. Every night she dreamed of wandering the gray world, but she was no longer afraid. She decided to bury the secret. She locked the radio in a box and stored it in her basement. But one night a voice woke her. "Rachel!" She startled awake. The radio was by her bed. She opened it, and Edward's voice echoed, "You closed the door, but they're still inside you." She smashed the radio, but its pieces kept speaking. "We're with you, always." Rachel wrote her story in a diary and hid it in a secret place. She knew the story wasn't over. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw that red glint in her eyes. From Whisper Dark, this story is a warning. Old things don't just hold history, they're doors. The next time you turn on an old machine, make sure it's not calling someone. Good night.